We appreciate your time and your support of Management HQ. We've had a bizarre year. The pandemic has forced some tough changes. I know one of the toughest and saddest for our team members and for our clients is not being able to be there in person to support one another through this. Our in-person events can serve that purpose. Our events also serve to drive revenue and engagement for our associations and their members. We cannot wait to be back in person doing our thing and helping you do yours. In the meantime, we have some unknowns ahead. I am so glad to have with me here today our events team leadership and some of our executive directors to talk about some of the lessons that they learned from 2020, make some predictions and offer some guidance for 2021, and share some best practices for future events. We are also going to be providing to participants an exclusive MHQ guide for event decision makers, which we will email to you all after this event. And now I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll get started.
All right, my name is Isaiah Allen. I am one of the executive directors here with Management HQ.
Good morning, my name is Mackenzie Kelly. I am MHQ's events manager, and I work with all of our clients.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Jim Murphy, and I also serve as an executive director of one of our international clients here at Management HQ.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Merrill. I am the events and outreach coordinator here at Management HQ, and I get to work with all of our clients.
Derek, looks like you're muted.
Thank you. You would have missed your first question if I was still muted. So my first question for you all is, we've gone through a full year of events with each client responding to the pandemic. Can you each share with us a lesson that you've learned?
Sure, I can go ahead and start. I would say that it's really, really important to have a strong team and volunteer committee working closely together. That's really going to impact the success of the event and how the team on our end, as well as the volunteer committee, is working together.
Yeah, I think that planning is key. We've learned that quite a bit through this process, and looking at what your internal resources and capabilities are in order to really make the best decisions possible regarding some of the variables like software platforms, technical support, things like that, in order to ensure that the event runs as smoothly and as successfully as possible.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that and just say managing expectations and being able to be flexible and pivot. Not everything is going to look the way that you are used to and the way that you want it to, just because that's the nature of events. Things are always changing, regardless of the format. And so being able to be flexible.
Yeah, I think something that I've seen that's been a big determining factor is the capacity for leaders to make deliberate decisions, and then follow that up with second tier decision making that involves, the strategic direction of the organization and financial considerations. Particularly in the moment of crisis and in the moment of urgency, as a team being able to make strong decisions and then move forward and determine a new path.
Thank you. I think that's such a key, the decision making and that ability to adjust quickly and respond, right? And I've really seen groups wrestle. These are hard decisions. I've seen our clients, I've seen other associations and nonprofits really wrestle with that decision to take an in-person event that's so near and dear to them to shift it to virtual. Have you all seen any benefits to shifting to virtual events?
Yes, we've definitely seen the difference in both attendance as well as accessibility as two main benefits. Obviously, a lot more people are able to participate typically with a virtual event versus in person, as well as the access to the entire program and all of the workshops. We've noticed that by recording and having the online posting of all of the presentations, it allows for both the attendees to benefit from all of the workshops, as well as the opportunity to allow for future purchase from non-attendees.
Yeah, as Jim was saying, you can really extend your reach to new people, new demographics, states, and even countries, actually, for our international clients. For example, one of our clients was a Minnesota-based organization. They generally would just probably have Minnesota participants, but with their virtual conference earlier this summer, they ended up with attendees from over 25 states, even some from Canada. So that was just a really cool experience for them to really further their cause throughout the country.
The other nice thing about being remote too, it helps with the longevity of your organization. You can record sessions the way that you wouldn't normally do in person. And that way you have that for your archives for later.
Yeah, I think anytime you've got to make a shift, it allows you as an organization to start to think creatively, to start to think about new opportunities. And I think we've seen that happen in programming of the leadership being able to think creatively about different ways to engage their audience, and not rely on the traditional ways of approaching the material that they deliver to look at new opportunities. So I think a lot of the specifics that the other team members have mentioned about expanded audience and increased engagement are reflected in that, but also just differences in the way things that are delivered and presented.
A good case example is that one of our clients realized a 350% increase in their attendance this year with a virtual event versus last year with their in-person event.
Those numbers are incredible with attendance. And one of the big focuses for us and for our clients across the board is inclusion. And that accessibility, that online accessibility, like you all were talking about, really does drive inclusion in a way that in-person events might not be able to. The other piece that I didn't hear a lot of mentions of, but certainly we've seen some positive financial impact, and we were surprised by that for a number of our clients who were able to respond quickly and really be intentional about how they designed their virtual events. So does anyone want to speak to that at all?
I mean, pending what route you take with your virtual conference, it could be expensive. You could spend a lot on a fancy virtual platform, but like we've found that that's not always necessary, and our team can help a lot internally. And then you are saving costs because you're not paying for food and beverage on site, which we all know is one of the biggest expenses, or on-site AV you're avoiding. And then two, if you can increase your attendance, and so you can come out ahead in the virtual component.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits that you bring up there is that all of our minds are constantly working in evaluating how we did something. And in an in-person event, when you have things that were printed out as far as placards and signs and posters, that's a one-time thing. You have to decide and have them completed prior to the event. With a virtual event, as we continue to improve, we have that ability to modify things as the event is going on at times as well. So that we can continue to put more information out there and enhance what we're providing.
That's interesting, that ability to really respond in real time and customize the experience for participants. It sounds like that's been a benefit too. And I love that, and our clients have been able to do this too. Our team's been able to do this, really see some of the silver lining of, again, what is a difficult situation and where we'd all prefer to be seeing each other face to face. So I appreciate your perspective on that and sharing the benefits. So there's a type of event called the hybrid event, which is a combination of online, virtual, and in-person events. One event, an online and an in-person event. And we have done some of these events in the past, pre-pandemic. Can you all share your experience with these, particularly our executive directors, Isaiah and Jim?
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I would say the first thing is you really have to go in with your eyes wide open. With the hybrid event, you need to really make sure that you have the proper resources and capabilities in order to be successful. Expense can absolutely be a significant factor as you're looking at all of the technology that's needed, in addition to the added staff time and workload on staff in order for you to pull off the hybrid event. You need to make sure that there's a solid balance so that the experience is positive for both the in-person as well as the virtual participants.
Yeah, I think this is one of the big questions that we'll see develop over the next 2 years. Is prior to COVID, hybrid events were a bit of a novelty. The in-person was really the main event, and then there were online that were online components that were there to kind of pick up a fringe piece of registration. With COVID now and the normalization of virtual communication like we're doing right now, I think it'll be interesting to see how it is that impacts the overall event space moving forward. And I would anticipate that the virtual component of our events is going to be much more robust than it was in 2019 moving forward. And Jim raises a good point of figuring out a financial model that works with that. We have to develop functionally two financial models at the same time that relate to each other: an in-person financial model that supports the organization and a virtual financial model that supports the organization. And to be able to blend those two pieces together and make sure that they both fit the scope of what's happening and support the organization and its mission going forward. So that's going to be an interesting development that we track moving forward, is seeing how that unfolds and how organizations can utilize that for their advantage.
Well, and in a moment, I'm going to ask Mackenzie and Becca about your perspective just from a logistics standpoint. What do these hybrid events look like? One thing from a strategic standpoint that I've been thinking a lot about is it's similar to running two separate events, right? We've got on-site and all the IT that Jim was talking about, and then we've also got in-person people to attend to and to provide an awesome experience for. And really, how strategically can we look at pricing these events and logistically setting them up so that maybe there is content that is repackageable after the event that can be monetized, but how do we not lose money on these events? And I think that is a piece that takes some real concentrated strategy and planning and discussion and intentionality around that piece, because otherwise I think there's some potential for just a really, really expensive event that maybe doesn't drive the revenue that our associations are hoping for. Mackenzie and Becca, as far as logistics with hybrid events, can you speak to that a bit?
So I think there's a lot of different directions that associations can take. Really, we would need to work together to figure out what aspects are most important to you that you want to make sure you're offering both in person and virtually, as well as, is the virtual piece going to be running live or concurrently with the in-person piece, or are you going to have sessions recorded and then made available on demand either later that day or even like after a few weeks when the in-person takes place? So just like a lot of different options, and kind of we would just need to work together and figure out what pieces are most important to you that you want to make sure are offered to everyone, both in person and virtually.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the importance of planning, like Mackenzie said, knowing what you're going to offer virtually versus what you're going to offer in person, and just being consistent with the experience so that you're not losing anything by doing one or the other.
So we've talked about benefits to shifting to virtual events. I want to kind of get back to that virtual event space. What are some of the challenges or items groups really need to consider when they are making that shift from a previously in-person event to a virtual event?
I think some of what we've learned is in terms of communication, that needs to be very well crafted to the target audience, especially those that have not typically been open to virtual events. We've gone through quite the transition over the last, 9 months or so, where we're seeing folks who never would have been open to a virtual event before suddenly considering it and being far more open to considering it, whether that's for putting it on or attending it. You also need to really look at the staff in terms of what their technical capabilities are, and very seriously consider what the level of technical support is through the potential of a third-party vendor for the event. This includes staff's ability to work with presenters and moderators, as well as the room hosts, so that they're all comfortable knowing what they need to do during and throughout the event itself. And I think the last thing I'll say is that being very creative regarding how we maximize interactions between participants, vendors, etc. Virtual events are very, very different than in-person events in these ways. And so we need to be a lot more creative of how we maximize that opportunity so folks can interact in as many of the same ways as they would and get the same benefits as an in-person event.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is really understanding what the value proposition is that you're presenting to your attendees. I think that there is a tendency to look at the in-person event and feel comfortable with the historic pricing model for that because we're familiar with it. And then approaching the virtual event as a significantly discounted experience. But the value proposition of our professional development events is the professional development content. Now, there are ancillary benefits of the in-person that we have so many people who would talk about the importance and significance and centrality of the networking component, the hallway conversations that are as important as the professional development pieces, right? Like those are a big piece of the in-person event, but there are ways to address some of those needs in a virtual environment. But I think understanding that value proposition and not undercutting yourself or cutting yourself off at the knees when it comes to pricing out an event based on the value of professional development content that you're presenting. If that's the key or central component of the event itself, then you really need to value that accordingly in the delivery of that, whether it's in person or virtual. And so not to undersell yourself or understand the value of the content that you're providing to your attendees.
So Isaiah, you mentioned the importance of networking, and one of the things that I have noticed is having a moderator or two in each of your networking sessions instead of just throwing people into a room is really helpful. Somebody to get the conversation going, somebody who has some questions prepared. Even if you're going into breakout rooms, people I've noticed have been a little shyer to, step up and voice their opinions or just even introduce themselves. And so having somebody there who can help facilitate the conversation has been really helpful.
I agree. And then regarding the schedule, I think that's probably one of the bigger challenges that groups are facing, because we can't just take what's always done in person and plop it online and expect it to be just the same. So you almost have to think about it as two separate events. And there's just a great opportunity to be creative and think differently about your schedule and what you're going to offer in a virtual space. You need to consider how many days it's going to be. Maybe your conference is traditionally 2 days, but virtually you're going to stretch it to 4 half days. Think about the length of sessions, how many concurrent sessions you have going on at once. I was in a conference last week and they were talking about maybe not having concurrent sessions at all virtually. I had never thought about it that way. So it was just a new approach. And also considering time zones too. When you have an international group of people attending, you need to factor in the time zone in which you're planning your virtual event.
One of the challenges that I've seen, and I continue to see it, I sit on a number of boards where it's kind of a similar situation that I think a lot of our client boards are facing, and client event committees and event leaders, where we're kind of feeling the need to really apologize. We're feeling like this virtual offering is lesser than the in-person, right? So it makes it an even harder decision if we're feeling like we need to take responsibility for this horrible shift. We are not letting y'all see each other in person. We're making you all just sit in front of a computer and see each other. And I've seen groups kind of process through that. And the reality is most people are relieved, in my experience. Most members are hugely relieved that they're not going to have to be forced to make the decision of, do they have to travel in the midst of a pandemic? Not everybody feels that way. Some people are hugely disappointed and see the online event as lesser than, but it's such a normal thing to do right now. And I have really just seen a lot of appreciation. So for groups that are struggling with the, how do we break this horrible news, you might be surprised at the response that you get. People are generally expecting things to be virtual for a while moving forward. And I would say across the board, and if I'm wrong, someone jump in, but I don't think when we've helped clients announce to membership that things were going virtual, I've seen mostly positive responses to that.
I would agree, Dara, and I think one of the I know we're talking about challenges and whatnot, but one of the added benefits is the transition times to small groups between sessions, things like that. You don't have the in-person time frame that gets involved in that, and with the ability technologically to break out into small group discussions in different rooms, we're able to do that a lot more efficiently. And it's quicker to transition between those. And then you also have the added capabilities of doing polls and things like that to gather data that can be done much more easy online and virtually than it could be in an in-person environment.
Yeah, I think one of the things, Dara, that your conversation points to is the importance of leadership and the recognition. Boards of directors are leaders of organizations. Event planning committees are leaders of the organizations, and people take solace when they see leaders leading and making hard decisions and communicating the factors that went into that decision-making process. And I've seen, even when there are groups with individuals who hold dissenting opinions, generally, with very few exceptions, even those dissenting positions have respected the leadership decision-making because they recognize, like, particularly in this circumstance over the last 9 months, like the weightiness of the decision-making, the like unique challenges associated with it. I think it really does speak to the importance of boards of directors acting as leaders of their organization, making hard decisions, standing together around those hard decisions, going through the hard processes of weighing all the factors in those decisions, and then communicating that with their membership and doing the best that they can to be transparent and honest, even vulnerable in different circumstances, in order to, garner the trust that good leadership engenders. So I think I think we've seen that play out really well in a number of circumstances.
It's a good point, Isaiah, and it's a really, really hard time to lead, right? I mean, it just is across the board. Every single leader I have talked to has, it's official. It's a really hard time to lead. So I think what you're saying just really points to the, we at Management HQ are here to support our leaders and provide guidance and messaging and strategy and whatever you need from us, but also really encouraging folks, knowing it's a hard time to lead, to make those leadership decisions. And I really love how you said that, Isaiah. So I'm going to start to ask for a little future predicting in a moment. But first, this is a little future predicting too. I want to ask you all for One tip on how boards of directors and event committees can prepare for the future. I know we don't exactly know what that future is, but specifically as it relates to events.
I'll kick it off. I would say be flexible and open to change, and just be creative. Be open to thinking differently about what events might look like, especially in 2021, because there's just so many unknowns and where we're going to be. We're all unsure, but if we just stay flexible and open to change, I think we'll be good.
Yeah, piggybacking on that, also just trust your staff. We want you to have successful events. We want your members to be excited and engaged. And so trusting us to both do our job, but also to listen to what you want and take that and create an event that will be exciting for you and your members.
Yeah, I would say be agile and be decisive at the same time. Make decisions as quickly as prudent, and then move with those decisions. And I think one piece that's important too is to rethink the way that you're doing communication and marketing. These are not the same events that we used to have, so we can't talk about them in the same ways that we used to. So we need to adjust the language that we use, adjust the invitation that we're using to adapt to the new circumstances.
And also adjust the mailing list too that we're emailing, because now that if it does go virtual, you can reach such a wider audience, like we've already talked about. So just thinking outside of your existing database.
Yeah, first I would say take a deep breath. These new formats can be challenging for many, but they really do offer an opportunity for a different level of success with the proper time and thoughtful planning that goes into it. I think, as Becca had mentioned, there's a need to trust your staff. The staff are here as the professionals and the guides to make sure that the event is successful. And you need to stay open to change. These times are challenging for everyone, as Dara mentioned a few times, but they also offer quite a significant opportunity for many associations as well.
Well, that's right. When I'm hearing you all talk about your tips, it really reminds me of how most of our clients have really responded this year to adjusting to change and being responsive and adaptable and open. And what you're saying, I'm almost hearing you say, continue to hang in there and keep being responsive and adjustable and adaptable and breathing, because we may need it for a little while longer. So I'm going to ask you now to specifically predict the future. What's your best guess when we will be back to normal as defined by our pre-pandemic activities, what we were doing before February 2020?
My estimate at the earliest is that we'll be well into 2022 before we get back to a normalcy in regards to what we've experienced in the past regarding events. Many events have a longer planning cycle, especially in terms of the in-person. Contracts and availability have definitely changed over time, and there's a need to have a higher awareness of those changes in the contracts because of further restrictions and limitations on cancellations and postponements. So really making sure that the time is put into not only reviewing, but recognizing that we plan these minimum a year, 2, sometimes 3 years out for in-person events. So that's one of the reasons why, we're not going to get back there until, again, my estimate is well into 2022, if not beyond.
I mean, I would also say sometime in 2022, although we are not us personally, but I know people are having in-person events. But I think this is also an opportunity to change in terms of equity, in terms of representation or something else, just the way that you do your events now. But see it as a way to move forward rather than going back to what we did in the past and what we think of as normal. I don't think we will ever get back to what we thought of as normal, and maybe that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, Dara, I'm not a public health expert, but I slept at a Holiday Inn Express last night. To the commercial joke. I got a head shake from Mackenzie, so I did my job. I think this is a real challenge. I concur with both Jim and Becca, particularly. This is a longer road than we anticipated. I mean, I remember way back 100 years ago in March when we were talking about 2 or 3 weeks of being out of the office. I think that this is a real challenge, and there are public health experts and those who are in our government leadership want us to get back to normal, and they want to give us a hope of normalcy, for all sorts of different reasons. But I think, to Becca's point, like, normal's probably fundamentally changed in some ways, and not necessarily in a negative way. And I think to Jim's point of, like, planning processes are really a long run course in this business. So it's probably 2022 before things start to, like, really feel like they did before.
I agree. I don't have much more to add, but I agree 2022 at some point, although I wish it were sooner. I know we all want to get back in person and have our conferences again, but I don't think we'll see that to its full extent for a little while longer.
Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Oh, I'm sorry. The one thing I was going to add is that obviously things are changing and changing rapidly, and anyone watching the news can tell that, there's things advancing, and if we had gone back a week or 3 weeks, every week or two it seems to change what my prediction might be. So we there's a lot of unknowns that are still going to come out that impact that in one direction or another.
Yes, and that's what I'm holding on to, is hope that it's not going to be 2022. But what I am hearing you all say is 2022 kind of back to normal, where there will be some gradations and steps toward normal. In that time, we don't know. I mean, of course, we're just guessing. And what we do to stay informed, to stay connected with our industry associations, with the hospitality industry, we're talking to other CEOs, seeing how other associations and association management companies are handling events. But it really is, I mean, even for me, and I know we've had this conversation internally, but to hear 2022 is just viscerally kind of shocking. And I think that it's a lot to get one's head around. I know one of the things too that we're doing right now, because we don't know the future, is trying to guide our clients, just looking through mid 2021, like, what are our recommendations, and then onward. And we've put together part of the piece that we're going to be sending out to you, some guides for decision makers. We've got some recommendations on events that go through April 2021 and then through the rest of 2021, just on some things that folks should be talking about. I know that Mackenzie is going to share a little bit about that with us now. Mackenzie, if you want to maybe talk us through some of those recommendations that we've put together.
Yeah, so we've got this guide that we put together to help our clients in making their event decisions for 2021, whether to go in person, hybrid, or virtual. The guide provides some background on our experience this year with hosting virtual conferences and one-day seminars. Also offers recommendations on timing based on when your events are currently scheduled for 2021, when you should be making major decisions, what needs to be considered and factored in. And then a big chunk of it is what we're calling the 7 guiding questions on making the decision regarding event format for next year. So it's pretty much 7 main buckets. It's more than 7 questions, but things to consider, like, what position does your association want to take on the pandemic and its risks? What travel restrictions are currently in place? What is the projected cost and benefit of renegotiating or even forfeiting an existing contract? Things like that. So as Dara mentioned, this guide will be provided to everyone that was part of today's conversation. And then our team is going to reference this as well when working with our event committees and figuring out what next year looks like.
And one of the pieces in there, one of the kind of guiding questions really looks at how are we going to ensure the safety of attendees? And there are definitely some hotels that are doing a fantastic job. And there are some associations, I think, that are developing strong standards and expectations. And I think we should do that regardless of when we get back together in person. It's going to make it easier. And I think it's going to make it faster for us to get back together in person. But something that I've heard from a couple colleagues is the challenge of enforcement. So if someone shows up to an in-person event and the policy is everybody wears masks and there's 6 feet apart, what happens when someone shows up without a mask, right? And is it going to be staff's responsibility? I hope not. But if it is, some clarity around that. Is it going to be volunteers' responsibility to deal with that? How does the hotel staff deal with that? So those are just some of those little pieces that it just makes everything a little bit more complex these days as we're making these decisions and trying to predict out into the future. But really that intentionality around policies and planning, it's not too early to start putting that in place in preparation and in hope for when we do start our gatherings again in person, which will hopefully be soon. Yeah, so I would love to open it up if folks have questions. If you want to enter those questions in the chat, be happy to put those questions out to our panelists. Did we answer everything? Was it the future prediction of when we're going to get back to complete normal that erased any questions from folks' mind? All right, I'm going to wait another 30 seconds if folks have questions, and then we'll wrap things up and get that event guide out to you all. All right, well, Steve has a question. What are some best practices you have found to fix the lack of in-person networking? That is a great question. I think we have found some simple and effective ways to facilitate that. Becca, do you want to kick us off? I know you do a lot of virtual events, not just major conferences, but all kinds of things.
Yeah, one of the things that we found being really successful is having a moderator who's got a few set questions that they can either put up on screen or pose to attendees at the beginning of the meeting just to get people thinking about what they want to talk about. And then something else that I've seen a lot is going around and having people introduce themselves. And if you have a small meeting, that works much, much better than a large meeting. If you've got 150 people, that's not going to work. But you can ask some leading questions and then put people into breakout rooms. And so they've got a smaller group to interact with. It helps them just connect more, and encouraging people to be on screen during meetings, which obviously doesn't work for webinars, but for networking sessions, it's really important to have people on screen just so they can connect with who they're talking to. So it doesn't feel like you're just talking out into the void.
And also too, with some of these virtual platforms, they have really robust networking setups, communities where you can create your profile and then you can reach out specifically to people that are of interest to you. So it might actually be even more impactful than the random hallway connections. Like you can be specific in reaching out to people that you might want to work together with, or could be a potential client or vendor. So I think people actually are seeing that they can have just as effective online connections as they would in person, if not even more.
Yeah, I think the breakout rooms and small group discussions, especially where there's a moderator like Becca was talking about, I've seen that work very, very effectively. And it can give folks the opportunity in that smaller group to interact, because oftentimes the question or topic might get discussed, but before they go back into the larger group, there's the opportunity to move on and have other dialogue as well. The other thing that I'll say is the chat box. The chat box in sessions, and that oftentimes will make some of those connections that you would get sitting in a workshop or sitting in a session where you heard someone else's answer. and you thought, well, I want to connect with that person because they either asked a really great question or they have some similar thinking that I do. And the chat box has helped to replace some of that by, allowing people to connect on different levels, even during the workshop sessions.
Yeah, I think particularly what Mackenzie was speaking to of event apps that function more like social media in the ways in which that they create community space, digital community space for people to interact, allow people to have a profile or persona that then other people can connect with and message and find each other in that virtual setting.
We've got a question from Alfred. How have you helped conference attendees adapt to the technology used during a virtual conference?
I can kick it off a little bit, but we do have user guides. We do a few different versions of those. So we have like a speaker guide, a moderator guide, and an attendee guide. We do trainings with all of our speakers and moderators prior to make sure they're comfortable with that. And then a few days prior to the event is when we push out everything to the participants and give them the information that they need to manage the conference, what to expect, things like that, as well as our team is always available for questions. And then if we are utilizing an online platform or third-party vendor, they're also available to serve as a tech team to assist people. And there is like a learning curve. I mean, the first day, you'll get a lot of panicked emails and phone calls with people trying to access the platform, or they didn't get the email, things like that. But then once everyone has the opportunity to get logged in and get comfortable with the platform and how things are going to run, they get the hang of it.
Yeah, I would also say it's an opportunity to rethink some of your communications. You don't have signage the way that you do at an in-person event, and so you have to be really strategic about how you're communicating to your audience or your speakers or your moderators, and what kind of information that you are communicating, because you don't want to overload people with information. You want to make it easy for them to understand, because oftentimes they are going to look through it 5 minutes before the event starts, and what are the key things that they need to know.
Yeah, I want to emphasize, all the things that Mackenzie and Becca both said. We have an incredible staff at Management HQ, especially in the events department, and very supportive as well. But I want to focus on the importance and benefits of that third-party vendor and platform in terms of the day of the event. Our staff have a lot of other things that they're doing in helping the event to be successful. But having that third-party technical support where your attendees can click on the question button or the help button in order to get the assistance, they're the ones who know their system the best. They're going to be able to much more quickly get them in and get them engaged into the importance of the professional development that Isaiah was talking about earlier, rather than taking the staff time away from all of the things that they're doing behind the scenes. And so I just really want to emphasize the benefits of really looking at what kind of platform is going to serve and support the overall experience for everyone.
One of the things that's really impressed me with the team is we have a pretty good understanding, and it's a very general statement, but some of our client associations have a higher threshold of for technology than others. Some are a little more technology adverse. Some will embrace whatever the latest is. And that's a huge generalization because our clients have hundreds and sometimes thousands of members, right? But I've really seen the communication internally adjust well. If it's a group that we know we need to make it really, really simple, we may forego some of the fancy marketing that talks about all these great features of the app or whatever, and just send 3 links. Like, here's the link you click first, here's the link you click second, here's the link you click third. And then in real time during the event, sending them what they need, really kind of taking them through it a little bit more intentionally and deliberately. And then for others, you just tell them to upload the app and wham, bam, boom, they're done and they're great and they're loving it. So I think that's a really important piece, is that it's not a one size fits all. You really do need to customize it depending on the needs of the membership. Scott has a question. Zoom burnout is already a thing. It is already a thing. Imagine where we'll be in another 6 months. What are you hearing of alternatives to virtual events? Is anyone doing safe distancing live? Well, and I don't mind starting that one, because I was just talking with a group, an association management company that works with mostly local associations within their area, within their city. And they were talking about things like golf outings. They were doing some golf outings in person in the summer. They were doing some gatherings, 1 hour gatherings inside with safe social distancing. So that was what the groups were wanting, but the size was greatly reduced. I don't know if at this point, particularly in the area that they're in, everywhere it seems the pandemic numbers are just growing and growing, but I don't know if that would still be the case, but I for sure have heard of some. It was a little more in the summertime, at least in our area, because our climate doesn't necessarily allow for a lot of outdoor, except for skiing and ice skating, networking events in the wintertime. What have the rest of you heard about in person?
If anything, what I'm hearing and seeing is right now, with those rising numbers, the move in the opposite direction, away from considering anything in person, especially as we head into winter and colder temperatures. It's obviously much easier and safer to do something outside, but many areas of the country are no longer able to do that as again we head into the winter months. Some of the things I would also suggest is that if an association is considering this, that they also need to look into both the waivers that are being signed by participants, as well as liability insurance, because that's an area that we just have not seen how that's going to play out in the long run with the potential of exposure and infection. So it's really important for any association or any organization holding an event where there is the potential to make sure that they're covering themselves as well. And through that process, if you're not able to get the liability insurance, then it really makes you want to question whether you should be having the event or not.
It's a good point, Jim. And I would certainly say we're not recommending in person right now. 6 months out, we don't know what that's going to look like. And I think you're right. We're going to be really excited at the prospect of getting together in person. But at this point, we're definitely not recommending in person. And for part of it, just for the simple liability that we don't want our clients to be put at risk. And in a lot of cases, there are, we'll send you our event kind of questions to ask, but there are limitations that your participants would have too that would probably prohibit in person. I do like your question though, the first part of it also about the Zoom burnout. I know we're all feeling it. At the end of the day, while I do want to spend time with my friends, the last thing I want to do is a Zoom happy hour with my friends because I've been sitting in front of the computer all day. Are we seeing ways that are there ways that we can kind of prevent that or manage that with participants and attendees of events?
Yeah, I think this is a real thing that warrants some real evaluation and consideration. And I think kind of in lieu of local events or things, now that numbers are going up, one of the things that we've seen clients, or we've helped clients add to their call for speakers is one of the questions for the speakers is, how are you going to adjust your presentation in recognition of the fact that we've, I don't remember the exact wording, but of the fact that we've got Zoom burnout. How are you going to make your presentation more interactive, shorter, and more engaging, so that as committees are making decisions about speakers and as speakers are preparing their content, like, we want to push that thought to the front of their mind and make sure that that's part of their consideration. And Mackenzie made reference to it earlier of rethinking the scope and sequence of the event, like how long, because we did it physically over 3 full days, you know, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday when we were in person, that might not be the best way to approach it in a virtual environment. So spreading it out, taking more bite-sized chunks. I know we've had conversation with clients too about in attending virtual events, there are probably different employer demands than if they were to be going to a conference. So how does that play into the equation too for making those adjustments? Because I think we do have to like recognize that, you know, we've been on this call for 53 minutes and it feels a lot longer than an in-person 53-minute conversation would feel, right? Like, so we have to make those adjustments and keep that front of mind.
So Isaiah totally stole my answer.
Sorry.
But also doing things like building in break time, you know, having 15, 20 minutes between sessions, and just doing something as simple as reminding people to stand up or go get a drink of water or just practice self-care, doing things like that is really important. But also reminding your presenters, you know, to sit far enough away from the camera that you can see not just a floating head, but you can see the shoulders. It helps people connect more, and so it doesn't feel quite as virtual. But doing things like adjusting the way that your screen looks, so you're not seeing, you know, all 5 of us on screen and just seeing one person, cuts down on Zoom fatigue because you have someone specific to focus on rather than trying to focus on all 5 of us.
That's a good tip, Becca. Thank you.
But
All right.
on webinars, you learn lots of tips.
All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions. Thanks to folks who did ask questions. And thank you all for your participation, for your engagement, and for your commitment to the future of your association. I think across the board, everyone on this call today who is a board member or an event committee member is a volunteer. So the fact that you're taking your time, investing it in your organization is remarkable. Keep an eye out for upcoming forum announcements. We'll be providing more down the road. And watch your inbox today for our MHQ guide for event decision makers. Always reach out if you have questions. You know where to find us. And we at Management HQ are honored to serve you and work together to help your associations thrive.